Humans have built colonies in deserts where water doesn't exist. We've put research stations on ice sheets 2 miles thick. We've placed a permanently crewed laboratory in the vacuum of space, traveling at 17,000 miles per hour, where a single puncture means explosive decompression and death in 90 seconds. But we will never colonize the ocean floor, not because we lack ambition, not because we lack funding, because the ocean doesn't permit it. And unlike the desert, unlike Antarctica, unlike space, the ocean is not indifferent to your presence. It is actively, physically, constantly working to equalize the pressure differential between your fragile meat prison and the surrounding water column. Every second you spend below 200 meters, the ocean is trying to push itself inside your body, through your ears, through your sinuses, through the alveoli in your lungs, through the cellular walls of your intestines. It wants in. And eventually, it gets in. Let's establish the mathematical certainty of why this will never work. At sea level, atmospheric pressure is 14.7 pounds per square inch. 1 atmosphere, your body is calibrated to this. Every 33 feet of descent adds another atmosphere. At 1,000 feet, about 300 meters, still considered shallow by abyssal standards, you're experiencing 31 atmospheres of pressure. That's 456 pounds per square inch, pressing on every surface of your body. The average human hand has a surface area of about 17 square inch. At 1,000 feet, there are 7,752 pounds trying to compress your hand into a smaller volume. That's the weight of a male African elephant standing on your palm. Now the ocean floor averages 12,100 feet deep. At that depth, you're experiencing 369 atmospheres. That's 5,423 pounds per square inch. The crush depth of a Los Angeles-class nuclear submarinum, among the most advanced pressure vessels ever constructed, estimated at 1,475 feet. We don't build them to go deeper, because the engineering becomes exponentially impossible. The steel required to withstand abyssal pressure would be so thick the submarine couldn't move. It would sink like a stone and sit there, immobile, a tomb made of metal. But let's pretend we solve the pressure vessel problem. Let's imagine we build a habitat, dome-shaped, constructed from steel and titanium alloys, pressure-rated to 400 atmospheres, sitting on the ocean floor at 12,000 feet. Congratulations, you've built a very expensive coffin. Here's why. To enter or exit this habitat, you need an airlock. This airlock must equalize pressure between the internal atmosphere kept at roughly 1 atmosphere, so humans can survive on the external environment at 369 atmospheres. The pressure differential is 368 atmospheres. That's 5,408 psi. Trying to force the outer hatch inward every single second. The hatch must be engineered to resist this force indefinitely. 1 microscopic crack in the seal, 1 flaw in the metal, 1 instance of metal fatigue, and the ocean doesn't seep in. It detonates inward. At 5,408 psi, water doesn't flow, it becomes a cutting jet. The same physics used in industrial water jet cutters, which use 60,000 psi to slice through steel. Your habitat breach would be operating at 1/10 that pressure, but that's still enough to cut a human in half. The James Cameron dive to the Challenger, deep in 2012, used a submersible with a pilot's fear, made of syntactic foamer composite material, specifically designed to resist compression. The viewport was a single cone of acrylic, 7 inches thick. 1 viewport, 7 inches for 1 person. And that was for a 3-hour dive, not a permanent colony. so you'd need to scale that up. A viewport large enough to let light into a habitable space, see 3 feet in diameter would need to be proportionally thicker. At abyssal pressures, you're looking at acrylic or sapphire viewports over 2 feet thick. At that thickness, light transmission drops to near zero. You'd be living in darkness anyway. Why bother with a window? You won't. You'll use cameras, external sensors, video feeds. Which brings us to the next problem: power. A deep-sea colony needs energy, lots of it. Life support, heating, desalination, communication, airlocks, lights, research equipment. The average American household uses about 30 kilowatts per day. A research station housing 10 people would need at least 20 times that. 600 kilowatt hours per day, minimum. That's 25,000 watts of continuous power. You can't use solar panels. You're 12,000 feet down. Sunlight penetrates to about 650 feet in ideal conditions. Below that, nothing. Photosynthesis stops. The aphotic zone. Eternal night. So, you need a power source that works in total darkness, under crushing pressure, in near-freezing water. With no resupply, nuclear reactors are the only viable option. The US Navy uses them on submarines, but submarines surface, they have access to coolant. They can vent waste heat. A reactor on the ocean floor has one method of cooling: the surrounding water, except you're encased in a pressure hull. You'd need a heat exchange system that pumps internal coolant through external radiators. These radiators would be exposed to 369 atmospheres of pressure, near freezing temperatures, and biofouling from extremophile bacteria. Maintenance would require exiting the habitat in an atmospheric diving suit. Essentially, a small submarine you wear that costs $2.50 million per unit and has a failure rate that increases with every dive. And if the reactor fails, you have no backup grid. No emergency supply ship arriving in 6 hours. You are 12,000 feet below the surface, in a habitat that loses heat at an exponential rate because water conducts heat 25 times faster than air. The internal temperature drops. Condensation freezes on the wall. Carbon dioxide scrubbers stop working. You have maybe 18 hours before hypothermia or hypercapnia kills everyone inside. This assumes you solved the resupply problem. A colony needs food, water, medical supplies, replacement parts. The International Space Station is resupplied every few months by SpaceX and Roscosmos. It's 250 miles straight up. You can see it from Earth. You can communicate with it in real time. A deep-sea colony is 2.3 miles straight down, in an environment where radio waves don't propagate and sonar is your only communication method. Resupply missions would require submersibles rated for abyssal pressure, capable of docking with your habitat's airlock, transferring cargo through a pressure-equalized umbilical. Each mission would cost tens of millions of dollars. Each mission would risk catastrophic failure. One failed docking, one miscalculation, one equipment malfunction, and the submersible implodes. The shock wave propagates through the water. Your habitat's hull, already under constant stress, cracks. Water enters at 5,408 psi. You die in less than a second. Your body doesn't drown. It compresses. The air in your lungs is forced back into your bloodstream, creating an arterial gas embolism that stops your heart before your brain registers pain. Your sinuses collapse inward. Your eyeballs rupture. The nitrogen in your tissues separates out of solution and forms bubbles in your spine. your joints, your brain. You are crushed and boiled simultaneously. This is not speculation. This is what happened to the Bifford Dolphin Diving Bell accident in 1983. 5 men died when a pressurized chamber was explosively decompressed from 9 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere in a fraction of a second. The official report describes one victim as having been fragmented. His thoracic spine was ejected through his chest cavity. His organs were found scattered across the rig. 9 atmospheres. Your colony is operating at 369. But let's say somehow you solve all of this. You build the hull. You install the reactor. You establish resupply routes. You have a functioning habitat on the ocean floor. Now you need people willing to live there. The psychological effects of prolonged isolation in confined high-pressure environments are well documented. The Soviet BIOS-3 experiments in the 1970s placed volunteers in sealed habitats for up to 180 days. Depression, paranoia, and interpersonal conflict were universal. The participants had natural light. They had space to move. They knew they could leave at any time. Your colonists have none of that. They live in a steel tube under 5,408 psi of pressure, in total darkness, breathing recycled air, eating freeze-dried rations, knowing that a single engineering failure means instant death. They can't leave. Returning to the surface from 12,000 feet requires decompression stops lasting days, possibly weeks. To avoid fatal nitrogen narcosis, they are prisoners. The longest anyone has lived underwater continuously is 73 days, achieved by Richard Presley in 1992 at a depth of 60 feet. 60, not 12,000. No one will volunteer for this, and even if they did, you still haven't solved the fundamental problem. The ocean doesn't want you there. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor spew superheated water at 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Underwater earthquakes trigger landslides that bury everything in their path. Methane hydrates deposits, frozen methane trapped in ice cover, vast regions of the abyssal plain. Disturb them, and they sublimate into gas, creating massive bubbles that rise to the surface and sink ships by reducing water density to near zero. Your habitat, built on the seafloor, sits on top of these deposits. One seismic shift, one rupture, one release of methane. Your colony vanishes. In 1963, the USS Thresher, a nuclear submarine, imploded at 2,400 feet due to a failed pressure hull. The Navy found debris scattered across the ocean floor, fragmented beyond recognition. The crew of 129 died instantly. Your colony would suffer the same fate, except no one would find the debris. You'd be 12,000 feet down in the aphotic zone, in a region of the ocean we've explored less than the surface of Mars. The ocean doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It equalizes, and you cannot equalize with the ocean and survive. We've known this since 1960, when Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended to the Challenger deep in the Trieste. They spent 20 minutes on the bottom and returned to the surface. That was 66 years ago. We haven't been back with a crewed vehicle since, not because we can't, because there's no point. The ocean floor is not a frontier. It's a grave that hasn't been filled yet.